Let's continue with this question. Did the marks of the nails and so forth appear because they were still in Jesus' consciousness or in the apostles' consciousness, of both? They were in the one consciousness, the one human consciousness. Therefore, they were in that of Jesus and of the apostle. And always remember this. We're coming to that tonight if we have time. That everything that is in what we call human consciousness, human awareness, is in the mind and awareness of every one of us, whether or not we know it. In the same way that everything that is a part of God is a part of us, whether or not we have yet discerned it. The immortality of God is the immortality of our individual being. Only now we must begin to become aware of that which already is. The infinite nature of God, the infinite wisdom, infinite dominion, infinite power, infinite joy, infinite love of God is all manifested as our individual consciousness. Only because of our years of humanhood, we now have to become aware of the infinite nature of our own being. In the same way, while we are on the human level of life, and remember Jesus eventually said, I have overcome the world. But until we get to that place where we say, I have overcome the world, we have the world in us. And if it gets a cold, we might get a cold. If it has a war, we'll have a war. If it has a boom, we'll prosper. If it busts, we'll lack. Whatever is taking place in the universal mind, we will experience until the day comes. And that's my special note for tonight, if we get to it, how we can prevent all of the things that are in the human mind manifesting in our individual experience. For all of our labors are in that direction, to prevent them happening to us. So as long as Jesus had crucifixion in his mind, he had to have nails and nail prints. And as long as he had it in his mind, they were in his body. And when did they disappear from his body? At the ascension, he had no more nail marks. He had a pure white robe. He had no more blood, because by that time he had ascended above the state of consciousness in which there are two powers. He was still under the belief of two powers until he rose above that. In what state or condition did he exist before his birth? And the same as we do. We'll come to that. You often write Jesus is still alive. All those who have lived are still alive. Under what forms? Now you see, you're looking out only from the human mind. And you have seen what you take to be corporeal bodies. And you believe that that's what exists. That's why you ask that question. There are no such bodies as you are seeing. Those bodies that you are seeing are mental concepts or images in thought. They're not externalized. They're not outside of your own being. Once you begin to perceive this, you will know that our pre-existence, our present existence, and our future existence will be of the same spiritual nature, including spiritual body, for there is no past, present, or future. There is only now. It is now that God is and I am. And that's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Therefore, the form in which I existed yesterday is the form in which I exist today, and the form in which I will exist forever. But as long as we are functioning through the conceptual mind, the mind of concepts, we will see us coming into existence as infants, growing to maturity, into old age, and finally death. And not one single bit of this transpires anywhere except in that universal mind of man. And how did that come about? By accepting good and evil. The moment you have neither good nor evil, you have only God and spiritual being. And then when you look out, you're not aware of corporeality. You're aware of the qualities. I said last night, the atmosphere that people give out, that's what you're aware of. Less and less are you aware of corporeality or much attached to it. What do we know of the hereafter? There isn't any. There's only now. There is no hereafter. When the disciples in the Transfiguration could see Moses and Elias, that's what the Master was showing them. Nobody is dead. Everybody exists here and now. But where is here? Are we talking about a room or our consciousness? Well, we aren't in a room. We have this room in our consciousness. That's what makes us aware of it. And that's where we have Jesus. That's where we have John. That's where we have any of the inspired masters who are with us at this moment. Now, of course, on this point hinges a tremendous revelation. And that is this: we are never alone. Never are we alone. Just as we have human companionship, and we attract to ourselves the companionship we deserve at any given moment, don't forget our companionship changes as our consciousness changes. At one time, our companions may have been the people of this world. At a later time, our companions may have been those of a particular religious organization, and of course we wouldn't admit anybody else into that sacred circle. And then all of a sudden we find ourselves in an entirely different companionship. Why? Because our consciousness has changed, our state of consciousness. We are states and stages of consciousness, and at this level, these are my companions. Who is my mother and my brother and my sister? You are. All you who are of my spiritual household, you who are of my understanding, you who are my brothers and my sisters. And where is my blood brother and my blood sister? I don't know. They're around somewhere, right here on earth. I don't know where. Why? We are not of one spiritual household. We are not of one understanding, and therefore you are my brothers and sisters, not they. So it is. In my invisible life, there is a companionship, a tabernacling. As well as Jesus could tabernacle with Elias and Moses, whom he looked upon as great teachers, spiritual seers, so do we today have those who are our companions on this spiritual path. And I have mine, and you have yours, if so be you awaken to the realization that none of these have died, and that your own is with you. The teacher is within you. Your teacher may not be the man on this platform. That may only be a substitute until you find your teacher. And you may find your teacher to be an invisible presence and an invisible power, for such is the mystical life. The Master said, do you not believe that I can call on angels, legion of angels, to bring me down from this crucifix? Of course he could. Of course he could. There isn't anyone in this world who, once they spiritually awaken, is not aware of presences, powers, within their own being. And you can turn within in any emergency. It makes no difference. You don't have to wait for emergencies, but in emergencies is the time that the average person usually turns, and you will find that there is an invisible presence or an invisible power. You may identify it as some teacher or leader of the past. You may recognize it as some teacher or leader of the present. Once you touch the mystical realm, you are in a world where things happen that never happen in the human realm. Several of us here were present in one city where a metaphysical teacher came to visit and asked me if I would meditate with her once a day while she was in town. She had come for that, hoping to have that specific experience. And I said yes, and we meditated every day. After the fourth meditation, she went to her room at the hotel and evidently at the usual time slept. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, she awakened to find me sitting on her bed. And she sat up frightened and said, "Oh, God, I don't want Joel." And the voice spoke to her and said, "What is the difference?" Oh, her answer, her thing was, "I don't want Joel, I want God." And the voice spoke and said, "What is the difference?" Well, now, the point there is this. What is the difference? You see, God is manifest. God is expressed as individual being. It's still God. Now then, in some of the occult work, you could perform things like that intentionally, mentally. You could intrude yourself into a person's mind or life. Spiritually, you can't. Spiritually, you never touch the mind of your patient or student. You never intrude into their thought. You never put yourself into their thought. The spiritual teacher and spiritual practitioner of the mystical path will only make his conscious union with God, and then let follow what may. Now, if I make my conscious union with God, and you are attuned, you're bound sooner or later to have some kind of an experience. Now, it may result in your actually realizing the presence of God. It may result in your recognizing a presence that you identify as Jesus Christ. If you're a Christian, if you're a Buddhist, you might recognize it as Buddha, because it's the same consciousness appearing as different form. Or you may recognize it as Joel. You may actually behold Joel in your own consciousness, or you may externalize him on your bed or on your divan or wherever you may happen to be, or beside you in your automobile. It will not be Joel, it will be God. You have merely translated that appearance into that which most nearly approaches your idea of spiritual teacher or spiritual leader. So it is. Watch this carefully. We are not mentalists, we are not occultists. We do not fool around with the human mind. We do not intrude ourselves into the mind of any of our students or patients. We never project a treatment at them. We never project our thought into them. We never try to influence their thought even for good. We do not touch their thought at all. Our work is the purely spiritual work of making contact with God and then letting it appear to you as it will. And it can appear to you as a message, as a scriptural passage, as a light, as God, very God itself, as the Christ, as Jesus, as John, or as your own teacher. But the point is that you have received, through the God contact of the teacher, you have received God contact and illumination yourself. But never believe that anyone can do this for you or to you by willing it or desiring it or trying to make it come about through any mental means. This will only thwart it, and this can lead to dangers. That was one of the early discoveries that Mrs. Eddy made, that the mind that can do good can do evil. And so the mind that can work on your mind and say, you are well and you know it, can also say you are sick and you know it. And it can also say, come bring me some money. Do you see that? The same human mind that could project good thoughts can project evil thoughts. And we do not project either. We make conscious contact with God within our own being. We come into conscious union with God, and then that appears to you as health, harmony, supply, peace, joy, relationships, whatever it is. And if you are sufficiently attuned, you will, on some occasions, have that mystical experience or a mystical experience in which you will behold some form of reality. Each one translates it, or it is translated within each one in accord with their consciousness. We'll have a lot more to say about that, I think. Now, we come to this. Because, as you recognize, this class has become a class on mysticism, or the mystical way of life. And I would like to point out to you that the word mystic or mysticism or mystical, these words are more feared than revered. And the reason is that one of our major dictionaries gives an interpretation of, an explanation of what? Definition. Thank you. A definition of the word mystic or mystical, which is not at all in accord with usage today. I don't know how correct it is because I know nothing about those things. But I do know that it completely contradicts the Webster Dictionary definition. Webster says, and that this is common usage today, that mysticism is any teaching that reveals the possibility of conscious contacting God, of receiving divine impartations directly from God, of conscious union with God. Now, the other dictionary says that mysticism is a teaching that is mysterious, dark, hidden, and sometimes evil. Very opposite. And it is for this reason that so many people have claimed that Christian Science isn't mystical and that Christianity or even Christian religion isn't mystical, but it is. Anyone that believes that prayer can reach God and that God can answer prayer, anyone that believes that there is a possibility of communing with God has accepted a mystical teaching. So every one of the Christian churches is mystical. Christian Science is more so because it believes in a more direct contact and direct answer on this plane. Unity is exactly the same. Any teaching that accepts the possibility of direct impartation from God to man is a mystical teaching, but not mystical in the sense of being mysterious, dark, and evil, but mystical in the sense of conscious union with God. Now then, that is what this class has turned into. It is a class revealing, first of all, that the original relationship between God and man is oneness. One. Not two. One. And because God the Father is greater than God the Son, the impartation is always from God to man. Therefore, we never speak to God, except in the sense of, "Oh God, enlighten me." But otherwise, we never speak to God. Our mystical way of life is developing the listening ear, listening for the still small voice of God. For God is not in the whirlwind. God is not in the storm. God is in the still small voice. And if you wish to become aware of God, if you wish to have the God experience, you must have it by developing your listening ear. Do you have ears and do not hear? Do you have eyes and do not see? Well, close your ears and close your eyes, and you'll both hear and see. Because there is an inner power of discernment which has direct contact with God. And God is forever imparting itself through our spiritual senses, our spiritual faculties, that which we call soul faculties. Now, we have soul faculties. We have spiritual faculties, which probably are the counterparts of our seeing and hearing faculties. But we have these spiritual faculties, and these are our contact with God. Therefore, we need never speak to God, and we need never think thoughts. If we think thoughts, it is only to raise ourselves out of the realm of thoughts. For God is not in word, and God is not in thought. God is in the still small voice. God is in the silence. When thought is still, when the mind is still, when we're at peace within, God speaks to us through our soul faculties, and we become aware of it in sound, audibly. We become aware of it visually by things we see. It may be light. It may be spiritual substance, spiritual form, awareness of some kind. It may just be a sense of release or of peace, and we can feel that the Spirit of the Holy Ghost has descended upon us. The Spirit of the presence of God has descended upon us, and we are enveloped in Him, and He in us. Now, you will remember that Jesus said, and He said it right from the platform of the Hebrew synagogue in Jerusalem, "I am ordained to heal the sick. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me." That's the mystical experience. Before that happens, we are a human being, a mortal, something separate and apart from God, something that has no God contact, is not blessed by God, is not reached by God, is not even known to God. But at that very moment, when the Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, when I first feel that divine presence, from that moment on, I am ordained. And I'm no longer a human being, and I'm no longer a mortal man. I am now the Son of God. I am still a son of man so far as you see my body. I'm still a son of man in that I eat and drink. I'm still a son of man in as much as I still use transportation, so forth and so on. But I am the Son of God in that those other things are the least part of my life. The major part of my life is this presence and power which Jesus said has now anointed Him and ordained Him to heal the sick. And now, this day, this prophecy is fulfilled. On that day when the Christ touches you, on that day when the Spirit of God is felt within you, that is the day of your mystical experience. You do not become a mystic. You may never become a mystic on this plane. This may only be the preparation for the day when you will be a mystic. But you will have that mystical experience, and it will be followed by others. And as long as you are aware of a presence, a power, doesn't mean continuously, it means as long as periodically this assurance and reassurance returns to you, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. As I was with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses, so I am with you. I will be with you until the end of the world. I in you and you in me. I and the Father are one. We are about our Father's business. I go before you to make the crooked places straight. The moment you have that feeling, that assurance of that presence, you then rest back not on your humanhood, not on your human wisdom, not on your human health or your human strength. You rest back on it, and it's almost like resting back on a cloud. So tangible and so evident is it. And you rely on it far more than you ever relied on your mother or your father or your checkbook. It is much more valuable, much more powerful, much more present, much more everything than any human relationship ever could have been. Now, that is the I am. That is the Christ. That is the Son of God. That is when the Son of God is born or conceived in you. And from then on, if you nurture it, if you nurse it, if you keep reaching to it, keep relying on it, keep turning within, acknowledging its presence and its power, it develops and it grows. You have to be careful to take it down to Egypt, too, and hide it. Because if you tell your friends and neighbors about it, you will be ridiculed to such an extent that you'll wish you'd never even have thought of such an idea. Keep it secret and keep it sacred. Hide it. Then one day, it becomes evident by its fruits. Now, it never becomes evident. Nobody ever comes up to you and says to you, oh, you have the Christ. No, it's never evident. But they come up to you and they say, you know, what are you doing lately? Or what are you reading? Or what are you thinking? You seem to be changed, or things seem to be improving for you. No recognition of the Christ. It's almost as if you had found some miracle word that you could twist around your tongue, or an affirmation that you could keep going. But it isn't so. What you have found is that the Spirit of the Lord God is upon you, and that now you have been ordained to speak the truth. You have been ordained to heal the sick, to comfort. Not necessarily to be a practitioner. It'd be a terrible thing if the coming of the Christ made everybody a practitioner. That isn't so. There are loads of ways in life to serve the Christ without being a healer of sick bodies. Now, from this moment on, when this first glimpse has come to you, this first awareness that you're not alone, that there is a presence within you, a power, which really does miracle-working things, from then on you behold it at work, and you will find why it is that in practically every one of our books there is the quotation, "He performeth that which is appointed for me to do. He perfecteth that which concerneth me." The reason is that that literally is my life. There is a He within me. It isn't male and it isn't female. It is a presence. You don't have to call it He, you can call it it. You can call it I. What you call it is of no moment at all. There is a something, and it does do that for me, that is given me to do. If I have to give a class, it gives it for me, and I sit here and let it flow. And if there is a book to be written, it writes it. And if it has to be edited, it provides an editor. And if it has to be typed, it provides a typist. And if it has to be published, it provides a publisher, even if it has to go to foreign countries to find them. It performeth, it doeth all of these things, and when there are sick to be healed, it healeth them. Does it really heal them? No. It breaks the illusion of sense. It destroys the mesmeric sense that claims that evil or sin is present. Please talk of how Solomon used the power of I Am, which he intended to reveal to the builders of the temple. Now, he didn't use it. He was going to tell them of its presence, and that if they abided in this presence, in this realization, they could travel wherever they would, and they could command a master's wages. He never did get to tell it to them, so they never found it out. But he knew it, and it built that temple for him. It made his wealth. I have warned our students 1,000 times. Watch out when that day comes, when prosperity and success comes to you through the Spirit. It is not likely that you will ever lose the Christ while you have problems. But the moment you don't have, you're in danger. Because then it is that prosperity is used for other purposes than that for which it was intended. Good health and strength and virility is used for other purposes than that for which these things are intended, and that is when the King Solomons of the world go wrong. That is when the King Davids of the world go wrong. That is when all of these great people who have failed, that is when their failure begins. Not in their days of lack or limitation, not in the days when they're struggling against disease, but when that prosperity comes and they begin to feel that God is showering them with dollars. God doesn't shower us with dollars. God showers us with itself. That translates itself into dollars, but not dollars to be spent profanely, not dollars to be spent on idol worship, dollars to be used in the purpose of good. Now, one of the greatest evils in all this world is prosperity, because it brings with it the temptation to use this prosperity in ways that are unspiritual. And I don't necessarily mean evil ways. I don't necessarily mean what the world calls evil. Self-indulgence in any form. Now, King Solomon knew this word because the wisdom of God had been granted him. Do you remember that? Solomon, when he first became king, was humble. And he prayed to God not for things, but for wisdom and understanding. And because he was humble and prayed not for things, God granted him his prayer and gave him wisdom and spiritual understanding. Well, you know some of the things he did with it, and why he ended as he did. Now, the very moment we attain a realization within our own selves that we are no longer alone, that there is a presence, there is a power, in that moment we have come into the mystical experience. That means that we have come into the experience where there is a transcendental presence, not a human presence, not a human being or a human fortune, but a transcendental something that cannot be explained. Yet it goes before us to prepare the way. It goes before us to make the crooked places straight. It goes right to the roots and the marrows of our bones and bodies and makes us every whit whole. Yes, it cements relationships. It takes people out of our lives too that could not be a part of a spiritual life. Now, this really is the ultimate goal of the Infinite Way teaching and of the Infinite Way student. That is why we can never have an organization, because an organization can't have the Christ. Only an individual can have the Christ. And an individual must attain it not by obeying rules, laws, regulations, not by forms of worship. Oh, no, you don't attain it that way. You attain it by meditation, by inner realization, by conforming your ways to the will of God, which means learning to forgive 70 times 7, learning to pray for one's enemies, learning to heal the sick, learning to comfort, learning to be benevolent, by taking all of the things the Master taught, praying in secret, doing our alms in secret, forgiving those who abuse us, praying for our enemies. By doing all of these things, we fit ourselves to be receptacles, to be temples into which the Spirit of God can flow. And that is an individual thing. A teacher can guide and direct and lead. A teacher can even bring to you actual mystical experiences, spiritual experiences, wonderful healings. But that's as far as the teacher can go with you. You eventually must receive within yourself this conception, this birth of the Christ. It is you yourself that must nurse it, practice with it, walk with it, talk with it, live with it, understand it, acknowledge it. And then when it comes into full bloom, you are your own teacher. You embody your own teacher within yourself. This presence is your teacher and your practitioner. It doesn't mean that you need necessarily turn your back on the one who has been your teacher. It doesn't mean that you should not want to commune with many spiritual lights in any part of the globe. Nothing is more inspiring than the companionship of people who have attained a realization of the Christ and are walking around with the Spirit of God in them. And it makes no difference whether they are the Persian mystics or the Hebrew mystics, Christian mystics, Oriental mystics, Japanese mystics. They are all the same people having the same emotions and having the same experiences, for there is only one Christ, only one Spirit of God, only one transcendental presence, and it is the same in all of those who have experienced it. So that we never get so great, no one should ever get so great, that they're greater than the great teachers or even those not so great, but who have attained in some measure this Christ, for we are all one in this relationship. Now, it does mean, however, that each now has this transcendental presence. Each now has that in which and through which they can live without consideration for anyone else on the face of the globe. Then our relationship is just one of communing, sharing, where two or more are gathered together in this name, in this Spirit. It's the most wonderful life. It would be wonderful if everyone in the whole of the Hollywood Bowl could gather together, of those, who had attained the realization of this presence, for then enough power would be loosed, I'm sure, even to clean up Hollywood. Although our reading room there is trying to do that in its way and measure. No, seriously, we are not trying to clean up anything but ourselves. For whatever it is that needs cleaning is within ourselves, and the transcendental presence does that. And each one must come to that awareness. But then it is difficult not to get into the mental. No, it's not difficult. It's not at all difficult. It's impossible to get into the mental. There's no way to get into the mental except by taking too much thought for what one shall eat, or what one shall drink, or wherewithal one shall be clothed, or how one shall heal. But in the degree of this silence, listening, peace, there's no chance to get into the mental. And this too, please explain the difference in the experience of union with the Father when there is no awareness of physical body, and when the vibration of the power or body electric is so strong as to lift or vibrate the physical body tremendously. Now, this experience of the vibrating of the physical body, or the shaking of it, or any of these physical manifestations that take place when one is meditating or the Spirit is upon one, is a natural thing. It means that there is that part of us which is this spiritual realization, and there is yet too much corporeality in our thought or consciousness, and this spiritual action is, as it were, trying to push out material concepts or physical sense. Therefore, it is wise not to be concerned about this, for there's nothing wrong about it. It is entirely natural and right. The one thing to do is, if this stage has come to you, where in your meditation there are physical manifestations, it is wise to do your meditating somewhere where no one can be a witness to it. Unless it be someone, of course, who has been through that experience or is still going through it and understands it. The world cannot understand it. The world can interfere with it. The world can ridicule it. The world can make you uncomfortable and self-conscious and can cause you to lose it. Therefore, be wise. If in your meditation you are noticing any physical aspects that may be noticeable to another, and these things do take place, then do your meditating in secret, not where you can be seen of men. Regardless of how difficult that may be, that's the way it will have to be. Ultimately, that ceases as the physical sense of self lessens. The spiritual activity is not meeting with resistance, and therefore there is very little of physical manifestation, and at least it is little enough so as not to be observed by anyone. Now, the difference between this and union is that in union there is no sense of corporeality left at all, and so there can be no vibrations, there can be no physical manifestations, there can be no awareness of body whatsoever. And there then is perfect peace. Actually, that state was originally called samadhi, and the samadhi of understanding of today is not the original samadhi. The original samadhi was conscious union with God, in which all corporeality was absent from thought, and one was at rest in their spiritual identity. Today, samadhi is apt to mean something like a dream state, or a mind that stopped state, or something of that kind. But that is not its original meaning. Its original meaning is the state of conscious union with God, in which all sense of corporeality has, for that period at least, disappeared, and one is living consciously only as spirit. That is understandable when you read some of the spiritual, the mystical literature, and notice how each one of these poets have agreed that I am the life in the grass, and I am the life in the tree, and I am the life of the star, I am the life of the animals, that is the stage where all sense of corporeality has been lost, and one realizes themselves in their spiritual identity here, there, and everywhere. Now, do we have time? I must talk to you about this particular thing, and I call it protective work. That's not really a good term for it, because it seems to indicate that there is something from which one needs protection, and I don't mean it in that sense. When I use the term protective work, I mean in this sense. I'm going now to use the example of subliminal perception. You know how that operates. A thought is projected into your mind. You can't see it or hear it. You don't even know that it's around. But all of a sudden you get up and go outside and buy a Coca-Cola that you don't want, or a bag of peanuts. Or you go to the telephone and find out you didn't want to go there for anything. In other words, it has been projected into your consciousness that you ought to do these things, but it has not been projected in any way that you can see or hear. How then does it reach you? Well, in the psychological language, or the language of psychology, it reaches you through your subconscious mind, and you don't have to see it or hear it, yet you become aware of it. And all of a sudden you find yourself, well, you've just got to have that bag of peanuts, or there's going to be somebody hurt that gets in your way. Now, this is the secret of sin, disease, and death. This atmosphere in this room, and in every place you go, indoors or outdoors, is just filled with subliminal perception. It is just filled with suggestions of sin, disease, death, false appetites, wars, fears of wars, rumors of wars. The whole air is projected with it. Everybody who is thinking a thought. It has been said that if a doctor in darkest Africa discovered a new disease, that the next day there'd be 100 cases of it in New York. Just putting it into consciousness conveys it to human thought. And that is why sin is called temptation. It is something that you are being tempted with, something that is being projected at you, offered to you, and you have the opportunity to accept or reject. You are being tempted. You're not creating the evil. You're not creating the desire. You're not responsible. You are being tempted. You can accept or reject. Now, there isn't a minute of time in which you are not being tempted to catch everything from a cold to a cancer. When you're not being tempted to eat, drink, smoke. When you're not being tempted to have an accident. When you're not being tempted to fear. Every single moment, the atmosphere is polluted with the fears of mankind, the sins of mankind, the diseases of mankind. And as human beings, we are antennas that pick these up. You go to bed at night feeling fine, happy, contented, prosperous. And you wake up in the morning and you have fears, and you wonder where they came from. You've got nothing to fear, but you're fearing. You have no reason to have a cold, but you've got a cold. A little child is healthy, everything well, and now it has polio. Where from? Just out of the air. Now, as you look around this world, you must come to the conclusion that when you don't get all these things, you're just lucky. Because so many are getting them, and so many have had them, and so many more will have them tomorrow, that are not responsible for them. I'm not talking about evil people who are drawing them to themselves. I'm talking about perfectly good people. Is the world helpless? Is the world at the mercy of this subliminal perception of sin, disease, and death? Mankind is, the human world is. The best they can do is when they wake up in the morning is hope they're going to be all in one piece at night. They can't know it, or they can't be assured of it. There is no way that they can protect themselves from it. But this is not true of the metaphysician. This is not true either of the Christian Scientist, the Unity student, or the Infinite Way student. It may be true of many of the New Thought students because they do not have any of this awareness that I'm going to talk about. But there's enough of it in the Christian Science movement, in the Unity movement, and in the Infinite Way movement, so that every one of these should be free. We're not demonstrating it 100%, but let's say an awful great thank you if we do it 90%. Now, the way is this. I have told you of the revelation that came to me not only of why there is sin, disease, and death, but how to heal it. The why is that we have accepted this belief of good and evil, of two powers. And as long as we have these two powers, we'll have health and sickness, age and youth, wealth and poverty, good and bad. So the only way to overcome in our individual experience the sins and the diseases, the lacks and the limitations, is to overcome within ourselves the belief in good and evil. Now, it's a long story of how. I'm merely telling you now the principle. The principle of healing is understanding that there is neither good nor evil. Not that there is good but no evil, but that there is neither good nor evil. There is only spirit, and spirit has no qualities and no quantities, except infinity. But being infinite, there's no such thing as an opposite called matter, materiality, evil, limitation, or finiteness. There is only that one infinite being, spirit. When you come to a state of consciousness in which you realize this, you are automatically a healer, and everyone who brings a problem to you will find that in some measure, certainly the measure of their receptivity, the problem will dissolve. Not because you have an inside track with God, and not because God is going to heal through you. We've done away with that nonsense. But because you stand before them in the consciousness of God as the infinite and the only. You have attained that transcendental presence which assures you that there is no power in Hezekiah and all his armies. There is no power in infection and contagion. There's no power in the calendar that tells you your age. There is no power in weather or climate, for I alone am power. I am power. Now, why wait to get sick or be in sin or lack? The person who understands the metaphysical aspect of life starts every single day of his life with the realization that God alone is. There is but one power, and everything that comes within range of my thought claiming to be power is this carnal mind or mortal mind, which is nothingness, the arm of flesh, just a zero. Now, I don't mean to make this statement or to use it as an affirmation. You know, I don't believe in it. I mean to sit down and ponder it until the feeling actually grows in you. There is but one God. There is but one power. And now I can recognize that no matter what I read in the paper, regardless of what headline, regardless of what comes over the radio, regardless of what my friends and business associates tell me, now I know beyond doubt there is but one power, and I am, and here is He. This transcendental presence within me is the only power. He that is within me is the only power. Now, as you go through your day, surely not waiting until noontime, you remind yourself again, there is but one power. I know I've heard a lot this morning about these evil presences and these evil powers and wars and threats of wars and depressions and sins and false appetites, and I know all about them, but they exist out here in a bag of nothing. They are not power, and they are not presence, and they cannot come nigh my dwelling place. For I and the Father are one, and the place whereon I stand is holy ground. There is but one power. There is not good and evil. Therefore, there is no evil. There is no power of evil. And the belief that there is evil cannot come nigh the dwelling place of the mind, the consciousness of an individual who does not accept two powers. Now, I will admit that for several years, a truth student should have 6, 8, or 10 periods a day in which to consciously realize, not just make a statement, not just throw an affirmation over his shoulder, actually to sit and realize, do I know God as one? Do I know the Spirit as all? Wait a minute, wait. Which is power? Spiritual power or material power? Are there two powers? Is there a spiritual power and a material power? Well, if you believe there's a material power, you're sunk. For now you've really got something separate and apart from God, and you're not going to meet it, because it exists only in your own mind. It doesn't exist in truth, in life, in spirit. If you yourself acknowledge, put up thy sword. Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. Whether it's a physical sword or a mental sword, the minute you've picked it up, you've acknowledged a power of evil. But the spiritual weapon or armor is the realization there's no spirit contending against matter. There's no spiritual power contending against material forces. There is no divine mind at war with a mortal mind. There is but one, and I am. Is that one closer to me than breathing, nearer than hands and feet? If I make my bed in hell, it's there. And if I make my bed in heaven, it's there. If I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, it's there. For I am is with me, and I will never leave me nor forsake me. I will be with me unto the end of the world. Do you see what I mean by protective work? Don't protect yourself against evil men and women. Don't protect yourself against evil organizations or ideologies. Don't protect yourself against weather or climate. Protect yourself against accepting the belief that there is both a spiritual power and a material power. And then you'll find that material power is the arm of flesh or nothingness. This is mystical living, in which you acknowledge only the Spirit. And to all else you say, get thee behind me, Satan. You're a bundle of nothing. That's as clear as I can make it. Thank you.